The leaves haven't even started to fall to the ground, but everyone I know is leaving this town. Packing up your ribbons and bows, wondering where the years go, and I don't know.
I'm adopted. My sister, Leslie, is also adopted. And my mom, Donna, is adopted as well. My granddaughter was also adopted within our family. So we've got now 3 solid generations of adoption, which we're pretty proud of. We also are pretty proud of our multicultural status. We like to think we're a worldly family. Probably not. My parents filed an application to adopt maybe 6 months or so after they put the application in for me. They got a phone call to say, you need to come down, we've got a baby ready for you. I grew up never knowing the difference between being adopted or not being adopted. It was always talked about. We always understood what that meant in my house. In my class, 3 other students were adopted as well. We kind of all hung out together and understood that we were special in the sense that other kids who would say, you guys are adopted, your parents didn't want you, we would kind of laugh at them and think, your parents were stuck with you. Our parents got to choose us. It was a really nice way to grow up, understanding that we were special and that we had 2 sets of parents that loved us, one that loved us enough to give us up and one that loved us enough to take us in.
I am Matthew Goodmanson. I'm 37 years old, and I'm adopted. I was born in 1978, the child to a very young mother, and she gave me up for adoption. 3 weeks later, I found myself in the care of 2 loving people, Barbara and Brian Goodmanson.
My wife Barbara called me at work and said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No." "Well, you better. We have to pick our little boy up in Edmonton." We had a nice wooden cradle that we set between us and put him in the cradle, and we just sat there and looked at him in awe for hours on end. It was quite an experience.
Once the pressure was off to have a child, they got pregnant, and my little brother Andrew came along. As we grew, my brother became tall and skinny and blonde, and I always was a little chunky Indian guy with really dark hair, really dark eyes. I always knew that I was adopted. And that was never, kept from me in any kind of way. And although I am half Cree, I never felt like I stood out in any way from my family. I always felt like I belonged. No family's without their problems, and I can imagine it was difficult growing up with me. I was always very out there. I was very much the clown, combined with the fact that I was very confident in what I was doing and where I was going with my art. ever since I could pick up a pencil or a crayon, I was drawing polka dots when I was a baby. And that translated to being a character artist. I think there's a lot you can capture of a character story. Anything where you could catch some soul behind the eyes, or lack thereof. As an extrovert, I've always felt comfortable with who I am. Even if I didn't love who I am at any given time, I was always comfortable with it. Knowing I was adopted from the very beginning was definitely a big part of that. To me, it was one of those things, it's like, oh, well, it's just like you're adopted, well, you have red hair, or you're a tall guy, It's just one of those things.
My name is Richard Dunbar. I'm a corporal in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I'm an aviation systems technician. Essentially, I fix helicopters. I guess with my story of adoption, it all begins when I was 5. I never really had thought much about adoption because I didn't even know what the word meant when I was that small, but I guess it began when my sister Misty, we got in an argument, and she mentioned to me that I was adopted during the argument. And then, of course, being a 5-year-old boy, I was like, wow, I'm adopted, and then I was a bit upset. And then I asked my parents, and they made a decision at that point, and I guess what they had told me is, yes, you are in fact adopted. So from that point on, I never really had a huge issue with being adopted. I just always knew that I was. So even though I didn't actually fully understand the implications of that, I was just like, oh, okay, I'm adopted. And then it's like, so what now? I've always known. There's some people to this day that if they were to find out they were adopted, their lives would be devastated to find out that their parents aren't their real parents. And the truth of the matter is, I do view my adopted parents as my real parents. They're the only parents I've ever known, and they're the parents that have raised me and loved me. And I've always took great pride in the fact that they've actually were brave enough to tell me as a child, especially because a child can never truly understand what adoption is. But when you grow up knowing you're adopted, you slowly start to fill in the pieces of what adoption means to you. And then it doesn't hurt at the end of the day. Whereas if I'd never known and then all of a sudden I found out, it would be like ground shattering. Like, oh my God, I'm adopted, what do I do? When I was a child, it was a real struggle to fit in, just because I really didn't know how. And all the other kids would be playing with each other, and I would just kind of sit back and listen, because I didn't really have anything to say. So essentially, you just want everyone to accept who you are. But when you don't even really like who you are, then it's kind of hard. So you're just looking at these kids and you're like, okay, well, I want to be like them someday. As I got older, I remember I'd make lists about things I'd like to change about myself, but when I was in elementary school, I mean, there was just really simple things. I wanted to be able to snap my fingers or blow a bubble. Just little tiny things like that. I slowly realized that these skills that other people had that I didn't, you can actually kind of fake them or put them into who you are. So, I mean, if someone's funny because they tell a particular joke, memorize the joke, tell it the same way they did, bam, you just took their humor. So at that point, I was funny. One of life's small victories.
Hi, my name is Taylor, and I'm 33. I was adopted when I was 4 months old. My parents just wanted a child. They had no specifications, and I think that says a lot about them, because it didn't matter what color, what race, what religion. Had a great upraising. I was in sports, swimming, pretty much did anything that I wanted to try, and me and my mom fought a lot. I kind of wanted to do whatever I wanted to do and thought I should be able to do it. I was very stubborn. I knew I was adopted growing up. I always knew. Both of my parents definitely did not look like me at all.
When on the road, take me down to the water. When
grade 3 a little bit, I would say that I had a tan to some people. I'd say, oh, I have a tan, just because I didn't want them to know. I don't know if I had a stigma against being adopted, or I don't remember if anyone asked me specifically anything about it, but I do remember telling someone that I had a tan.
You don't
I'm Taylor's mom. I've always been her mom. She was our second child to adopt. They always knew that they were both adopted. I'm sure they would have had suspicions anyway, but I felt that they should know their background and where they come from, because it's not really taught, and it certainly wasn't taught then.
My mom actually always took me to this. There's one African hairstylist in town, and she would take me to her to see if she could try and help me out with my hair, because she didn't know what to do, and no one really knew what to do. So every once in a while it would be a big treat, and I would get to go to her. And then there's a lot of stuff that I did learn after the fact. My birth family is from the small community of Africville. It's a settlement that was relocated, and that's a huge part of history and part of them. My father was actually, his parents were down there and had a house. There's pictures of them all living down there. And it was nice to know that I'm kind of a descendant of all that too, and I had no idea about that.
The social worker gave me a little background information. She was only up for adoption because her mother had been kind of put in an impossible situation. The social worker did call me from time to time and say that she would like to know how Taylor was doing and if I had a photo or anything like that. So I did do that.
My mother was communicating with my birth mother. She would write letters, just basic little tidbits of information for her to have and share with the family. And they were able to locate me through that.
Make it back someday.